뜨거운 박수 맞으시죠.
I want to start today by congratulating the organizers of this symposium on citizens' assemblies, and also to congratulate all of you who are participating. I served as an elected representative in public life in Canada for 27 years, as Mayor of Vancouver, as Premier of the province, and as High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. While I was Premier, one of the most significant, and I think one of the real highlights of my 10 years as Premier of the province of British Columbia was the Citizens' Assembly. It was a significant effort to include people in one of the most fundamental questions that we have in open democratic societies. How do we elect our representatives? In British Columbia in 1996, I was in opposition when the election came around, and my party got more percentage of the vote, more popular vote, than the party who eventually became government. Needless to say, a number of my supporters were very upset about that. My position was those were the rules when we ran, we have to be satisfied with them. But my supporters weren't satisfied. The question became, how do we decide how to elect our representatives? And that was one of the fundamental principles that we had as we looked at the issue in front of us. We wanted to reconnect trust between people and their public institutions. And so we did something that I think was quite unique. We decided to establish a citizens' assembly and let the citizens decide how they wanted to elect their representatives. This is not a question that should be left in the hands of politicians. So we did a number of things to make sure that we separated political life from this question of significant public policy. First, we decided that we would select one man and one woman from every riding in the province. There were 79 ridings. We also decided to select 2 Indigenous people to be sure that Indigenous people were represented, because it's a significant part of British Columbia's history. And as we did that, we decided that no politicians could be selected. The selection was done as it was done for a jury. We actually sent out 15,000 invitations to people to be part of the Citizens' Assembly. We asked them if they wanted to do the work. And so the first phase was to send out those invitations. The second phase was to have people who responded to come in and hear about how much work was involved in actually dealing with these questions. There was a lot of learning, there was a lot of information they had to gather, and we had our confidence placed in that assembly. We did not interfere politically at all in the assembly. We appointed a chair, former president of Simon Fraser University, Jack Blaney, a man who was known for his ability to bring consensus from diverse groups. Mr. Blaney went. We had literally thousands of invitations go out. Almost 2,000 people responded to the invitation, and once they'd come and they'd heard about how much work was involved, that it was necessary to do the homework, be away from home for weekends, and understand that this was a significant thing. There was a $150 per diem for people. We had daycare provided for people who required it. We wanted to be sure this was a unique and a really independent group of citizens. So there were 160 members of the assembly. The assembly worked literally for months and came forward with what they thought was a question as to how we should elect our representatives. They could have stayed with the status quo, or they could make a new recommendation. Now here's something that I think was important. We put a threshold of 60% of all ridings had to support this, and 60% of all voters had to support it. The Citizens' Assembly recommendations were not quite successful in overcoming that threshold. And one of the questions that people have had since is, was that threshold too high? And I think that's a legitimate question for people to ask. We believe that it was a significant constitutional change that we were recommending, and just as in many other areas of public life, whether it's corporate governance or even residential governance, there are significant majorities that are required to make a change. The one thing that I would say, and one lesson I would say that came out of this, was it may well be that a 60% majority of such a broad public may be too high, but that certainly is something that people have to consider. our Citizens Assembly's recommendations were close enough to success that we felt we should put it to a second vote. And it was not successful on the second vote either. Now, there were a number of things that people said to me after this endeavor. The first was how much they appreciated being part of the Assembly. The second thing to recognize was virtually all of the participants said it was critically important that there were just as many men as women in the Assembly, and that there was broad geographic diversity as well as a fairly significant demographic diversity in the Assembly. That was all established, and you can read about that in many of the academic papers that have been made. But I would say two things specifically about the Assembly that are for your consideration. First is I think we should recognize that citizens are absolutely capable of making these decisions. So some people in politics say, well, they don't understand and it's too sophisticated, it's too difficult. That is incorrect. Our Citizens Assembly did really excellent work, and the critical component of that was they were trusted. They were trusted by the citizens of British Columbia that they were doing the job that they had to do without political interference. In fact, we were very clear in the selection process that if you were involved in politics, if you were involved in elected politics at the federal, provincial, local level, you were not allowed to be part of the Citizens Assembly. That's how important that independence was and that citizen focus was. I believe our Citizens Assembly was a critically innovative response to a public policy need. I think we need today to reestablish our trust between our elected representatives and those that they represent. We need to re-engage citizens and incorporate their ideas and their thoughts into our public policy discussion beyond politics so that we reach for even higher goals and even greater consensus amongst our public. It's not an easy job being a part of an open democratic society. Democracies are not a spectator sport. It requires involvement, engagement, and hopefully through that involvement and engagement, we build enlightenment and even better public decisions. I think our Citizens Assembly in British Columbia took significant steps to try to bridge the gap between the public and those who are supposed to serve them in elected office. I hope during your deliberations, you will find the same level of excitement, enthusiasm, and innovation that we found in British Columbia. And I wish you nothing but the best as you examine the opportunities that citizens' assemblies present. Thank you.